In the dimly lit corridors of the Starship Odyssey, Captain Elara Vale stared at the holographic map that flickered erratically in front of her. She had just received an encrypted transmission from the Temporal Coalition's command, an organization that had existed in secret for centuries, its mission to protect humanity from an enemy that existed not in the present, but across time itself. A message, once thought to be a myth among her people, was now becoming a deadly reality. The Coalition had warned her of the Chrono Shifters, an alien race capable of moving freely between timelines and dimensions. They had once been relegated to the realm of conspiracy theories, whispers of time travelers interfering with history for unknown purposes. But the truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. The Chrono Shifters were no mere travelers. They were invaders, manipulating the threads of time itself to twist events in their favor. As if that weren't horrifying enough, they had begun targeting humanity specifically. As Captain Vale paced the deck, a small device in her hand began to beep, signaling a breach in the ship's temporal shields. A rare occurrence that only happened if someone, or something, had found a way to slip past the defenses. She quickly ordered her crew to stand ready, her mind racing as she analyzed the situation. The Chrono Shifters were here. The ship's AI, an intelligent entity called Aurora, quickly synthesized the data. Captain, I've detected multiple anomalies in the surrounding space. Temporal fluctuations. Time signatures, not from this universe. Elara, we've been found, said Commander Darius Cole, her most trusted officer. He was a seasoned warrior, specializing in temporal warfare, an unexpected but necessary addition to the Odyssey's crew. They know we've been hunting them. They're going to try to stop us before we get too close. The captain gritted her teeth, her mind moving at lightning speed. If they didn't act soon, the consequences would be catastrophic. It wasn't just her mission at risk anymore. The entire human race was vulnerable, and the Chrono Shifters' interference with history could unravel everything. The human race's progress, its very existence, could be erased in a single well-placed manipulation. Activate the time distortion weapon, Elara ordered. The Odyssey's primary weapon could distort the fabric of time, creating ripples that destabilized enemy ships caught in its wake. It was their only defense against the shifting timelines. The crew scrambled to execute her command, but the ship shuddered as another, more intense wave of temporal energy surged through the ship. Alarms blared, warning lights flashing red. This wasn't just an attack, it was a full-scale assault. A hologram appeared in front of Elara, distorted and flickering, a projection of a man she had hoped she would never see again. He was her former mentor, now a rogue agent with the Chrono Shifters, the man who had betrayed humanity for reasons no one truly understood. Elara Vale, the hologram of Commander Jonas Thorne, spoke, his voice cold and taunting. Did you think you could stop us? Did you really believe you could fight the flow of time itself? Her breath hitched at the sight of him. Thorne had been the one who had first introduced her to the world of temporal warfare, before he turned against the Coalition. You won't succeed, Thorne. We've already seen the endgame you're playing. And it's over? He chuckled darkly. You misunderstand, Captain. The game was never yours to win. The hologram flickered once more, then cut off. A sinking feeling gnawed at Elara's gut. She had known Thorne was dangerous, but now it seemed the full scope of his plans were only beginning to unfold. Prepare for battle, everyone, Captain Vale said firmly, regaining her composure. We'll need every ounce of strength we have if we're going to stop them. We fight not just for this timeline, but for every timeline that is in danger. Her crew, a diverse group of soldiers and scientists, nodded in unison, ready to face whatever came next. But none of them could have predicted just how deep the war would go, how far the Chrono Shifters were willing to go to win. As the Odyssey powered forward into the swirling vortex of temporal energy, Elara's thoughts were clear. The war had only just begun. And humanity's future depended on their ability to fight a battle that no one had ever truly seen before, across time, space, and reality itself. You said. The Odyssey lurched as the temporal field surrounding the ship intensified, throwing Elara and her crew off balance. Crew members scrambled to their stations, desperately trying to maintain control of the ship's systems. The sudden surge of energy was no accident. The Chrono Shifters were closing in. Captain? Commander Cole shouted over the chaos, his voice strained. The time distortions are increasing. They're trying to push us into an unstable dimension. Elara gripped the edge of the console, fighting to stay steady as the ship's systems flickered. Aurora's voice cut through the disarray, calm but urgent. Captain, there's a rift opening in front of us. It's a temporal fracture. If we get pulled into it, we could be sent back to any point in history. The implications of that were staggering. Being thrown into the past could alter everything, destroy the course of human civilization. If they were sent far enough back, humanity might never even have a chance to rise. But if they moved forward, they might arrive in a future already ravaged by the Chrono Shifters' manipulations. Can you stabilize the rift? Elara barked at Aurora. I'm attempting to compensate, but the fluctuations are too powerful. I need at least a minute to recalibrate the temporal shields. 1 minute. They didn't have 1 minute. Prepare for emergency jump. Elara commanded. Darius, take the helm. Get us out of here. Darius's jaw was clenched as his hands flew over the controls. The strain of navigating through time was taking a toll, but his experience was invaluable. Just hold on, Captain. The ship began to vibrate violently, the external viewports flashing with erratic bursts of light. The rift was opening wider, the gravitational pull becoming unbearable. Elara could feel the pressure building, the sensation of time itself twisting and pulling at her bones. In that moment she saw it, a brief flash of a face, an impossible figure appearing in the chaos of the rift. It was her younger self, staring back at her with confusion and fear. Her heart skipped a beat. The younger Elara was in a distant part of the ship, in her quarters. How could she be appearing here now, in the middle of a temporal fracture? Before she could process the strange vision, Aurora's voice filled the bridge again. Captain, I've stabilized the rift for now, but we're not out of danger yet. I'm detecting a timeline shift. Something is coming through? The rift flared, sending a wave of energy across the ship. For a brief second, Elara thought she was going to lose consciousness, but her mind snapped back into focus as a group of figures appeared out of the fractured space. They've breached the ship, Cole said, his eyes narrowing as he drew his weapon. Chrono Shifters. They're here. 5 shadowy figures materialized, their forms flickering in and out of reality. Their armor was sleek, dark, unlike anything human. They moved like shadows, their steps silent and fluid, as though they were part of the very fabric of time. But what terrified Elara most was their eyes. Empty, cold, void-like. These beings were not just warriors, they were manifestations of the very forces that sought to unravel everything she held dear. Prepare for combat, Elara ordered, already moving toward the armory. Her pulse quickened as she grabbed her pulse rifle. The Chrono Shifters had already proven how deadly they were, and now they had come to confront her in her own ship. The first attack came in a blur of motion, one of the shifters darting forward with lightning speed, slicing through the air with an energy blade. Elara barely managed to raise her weapon in time to block the strike, the energy field of her rifle humming against the blade's pressure. But the shifter was faster than she could react. In the span of a heartbeat, it had vanished, flickering out of existence, only to reappear right behind her. Damn it! She spun around, instinctively raising her rifle in defense. But just as the shifter lunged, a burst of energy erupted from the side. Commander Cole had fired, hitting the shifter square in the chest. It staggered back, but only for a moment. Stay on your guard. Cole shouted. They're manipulating time itself. Their attacks are unpredictable. Elara's mind raced. She knew she couldn't engage in direct combat alone. They needed a strategy, something to counter the shifter's unnatural ability to bend time to their will. The thought of time itself being used as a weapon twisted her stomach. We need to fight them across dimensions, she said, her voice low. If we can get the upper hand in one timeline, we might be able to force them into a more vulnerable reality. The sound of more shifters materializing nearby snapped her from her thoughts. The war for humanity's future had truly begun. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. The Odyssey wasn't just a ship, it was their last line of defense. We need to push them back now, Elara said, her eyes blazing with determination. For every timeline, for every future. We can't let them win. As the battle raged on, Captain Elara Vale knew this was only the beginning. The Chrono Shifters had come to wage war across time, and humanity would not be erased without a fight. You said. The Odyssey was under siege. The crew was scattered across the ship, engaging the Chrono Shifters wherever they appeared. The alien warriors had an uncanny ability to flicker in and out of existence, making them nearly impossible to track, but Elara and her crew had trained for this. Temporal warfare wasn't a skill easily mastered, but humanity had been forced to adapt, and adapt they did. In the ship's central corridor, Captain Elara Vale found herself face to face with one of the shifters. This one appeared as a blur, shifting its position faster than the human eye could follow. She fired a shot from her pulse rifle, but it missed as the creature vanished once again, only to reappear directly above her. Without hesitation, Elara rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the shifter's blade as it sliced through the air. Her heart pounded, but her focus remained sharp. The stakes had never been higher. She couldn't let herself be distracted by fear, not when the future of every human in every timeline depended on this battle. "Time to change the game," she muttered under her breath. Elara tapped her wrist pad, sending a signal to Aurora. The ship's AI responded almost immediately, a calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Captain, I've initiated the Chrono Net. It will track any time fluctuations and pin down their coordinates for a more accurate strike." The Chrono Net was a new development, designed specifically to counter the shifter's ability to phase through time. It wasn't perfect, but it was humanity's best chance to fight back against an enemy that could bend the very fabric of reality. A pulse of energy crackled through the ship as the Chrono Net activated, locking onto the shifter's temporal signature. Elara's eyes flared with determination as the creature flickered again, but this time, it didn't disappear. The net held its position and she fired a well-placed shot, striking the shifter in its core. The creature let out a distorted screech, its form beginning to warp. The brief flicker of its human-like appearance revealed a twisted, pale face, its eyes hollow and empty void. With one last agonizing pulse, the shifter crumpled to the floor, its body disintegrating into a burst of light and particles. Elara didn't have time to savor the victory. The battle was far from over. She had barely turned around when more shifters materialized at the far end of the corridor, and the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," she muttered, gripping her rifle tightly. But as she readied herself for another confrontation, a sudden, horrifying realization hit her. It wasn't just their ship that was under attack, time itself was under assault. The Odyssey wasn't just a vessel, it was an anchor in the flow of history. If the shifters succeeded in disrupting the ship's temporal integrity, the entire timeline could collapse, altering reality in ways no one could predict. "Captain?" Darius's voice crackled through her earpiece. "We've got a bigger problem. The rift, it's destabilizing. It's spreading. The ship is being pulled into multiple timelines at once." Elara's blood ran cold. The rift wasn't just a portal, it was a gateway to an unraveling universe, one where the laws of time and space were no longer fixed. If the Odyssey couldn't escape its pull, the crew could be scattered across countless timelines, each reality growing more chaotic than the last. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice grim. "Aurora, reroute all power to the time shields. We need to stabilize the ship or we'll be lost in the rift." But as Aurora began to execute the command, Elara's wrist pad pinged again. It was a new transmission. This one wasn't from the Temporal Coalition or even the Shifters. It was a signal from another Odyssey. The same ship. Only, it wasn't their ship. Elara's heart raced as she opened the communication, a hologram flickering to life in front of her. The image was distorted at first, but she could make out a figure, a woman in the captain's chair. Her features were strikingly similar to Elara's. Her face was weary, her eyes filled with the weight of war. The woman spoke, her voice low and strained. "Captain Vale, this is the Odyssey from a different timeline. I don't have much time to explain. You're caught in the Chrono Shifters trap. The rift is their doing. They're manipulating the timeline to erase your existence and replace it with one of their own. If you can hear this, you need to act quickly." Elara's mind reeled. The Odyssey from another timeline? Was this a message from a future version of herself? Or was it a warning from another version entirely? The hologram flickered once more and the woman's voice grew faint. "The key to stopping them? It lies within your grasp, but you must make a choice. You must decide which timeline to preserve, the one you know or one you can't yet see. The fate of the multiverse rests on that decision." The transmission cut off abruptly, and Elara was left staring at the empty space in front of her. The weight of her responsibility hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just fighting for her crew or even her timeline anymore. She was fighting for all of humanity, for every version of Earth that had ever existed, and for the ones yet to come. "Captain, more shifters incoming," Cole shouted over the comms, dragging her from her thoughts. "We can't keep up with this." She looked down at her pulse rifle, her grip tightening. She wasn't just a soldier. She was the protector of time itself now. "Elara." Darius's voice echoed in her earpiece again. "The rift's pulling us closer. We need to stabilize before we lose everything." Her mind was in turmoil. She had no idea what decision she was supposed to make, but one thing was certain: time was running out. As the battle raged around her, Elara realized something crucial. The war she thought she was fighting wasn't just a war of weapons or strategy. It was a war of choices, of realities. And whatever decision she made would echo through every timeline, every dimension. The future of the multiverse was in her hands. The fate of humanity, every version of humanity, depended on her next move. The Odyssey's hull groaned under the pressure of the temporal rift as Alara stood at the command console, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Her mind buzzed with the impossibility of it all. The message from her alternate self, the strange warning about the fate of the multiverse, had only made things more complicated. She had never imagined she would have to choose between timelines, between realities. "Captain?" Darius's voice sliced through her thoughts. "We're being pulled in. The rift's magnetic field is intensifying. If we don't do something, we'll be stuck in a time loop. I can't break free from this pull much longer." She looked at the readouts on the console. The ship's systems were beginning to fail, the distortions corrupting vital functions. The rift was destabilizing the timeline even further, threatening to rip the Odyssey apart along with its crew. "We're not getting out of this without a fight," Alara said, her voice hardening. "Activate the chrono core. If we're going to survive this, we need to use the ship's core as a stabilizing anchor. It's risky, but it might give us enough time to make a move." Aurora's calm voice responded, "Understood, Captain. Initiating the chrono core sequence. However, please note that doing so may cause a significant shift in our current timeline. We may be forced into a paradox state." Alara's heart tightened. A paradox? The implications were dire, but there was no choice. The Odyssey couldn't withstand the rift's pull without pushing its technology to the brink. It was their only shot. She turned to Darius. "Get to the temporal stabilization deck. We need every engineer we have. Hold this ship together." He nodded, his face grim. "I'm on it, Captain. I won't let this ship fall." As Darius and the rest of the engineering team rushed to their posts, Alara turned back to the main tactical screen, her eyes scanning the shifting patterns of the rift. The Chrono Shifters were still out there, close. She could feel their presence, like shadows lurking just beyond her reach, manipulating the very fabric of time. They were playing a long game. They always had been. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and the sound of the rift's collapse grew louder. Alara gripped the console harder. They were running out of time. "Captain, incoming Chrono Shifter fleet," Cole's voice crackled over the comms. "They've deployed more vessels. This is it. We can't hold off their forces without immediate reinforcements." Alara closed her eyes for a moment. She had to make the right decision now or they would lose everything. "Activate the temporal shields. I want all weapon systems primed for the Chrono Shifters' arrival," she commanded. "We need to buy ourselves more time." As her crew worked furiously to implement her orders, Alara's mind returned to the strange message she had received from the alternate Odyssey. What had her future self meant when she mentioned making a choice between timelines? The more she thought about it, the more she realized the truth. The Chrono Shifters were trying to do something far more insidious than simply altering history. They were looking to create an entirely new reality, one where humanity's future was wiped out. The rift was a weapon. The Shifters weren't just erasing parts of the timeline, they were rewriting them. They were creating new branches of reality where humanity would never rise, where the galaxy would fall into chaos and darkness. Alara wasn't just fighting to save her timeline, she was fighting to preserve the very concept of history. If she failed, there would be no future to save, no humanity to protect. With a deep breath, she pressed a button on her wrist pad, sending a direct command to Aurora. "Initiate the Chrono Beacon Protocol. I need every available ship within 100 light-years to converge on our position. We'll need reinforcements if we're to survive the Shifters' attack." The AI acknowledged her request, and Alara felt a small sense of hope. The Odyssey wasn't alone in this fight, even if the odds were against them. The Coalition would answer her call. And they would stand together, humanity's last line of defense against the war across time. Just then the temporal shields flared to life, glowing a brilliant blue, and the ship's weapon systems powered up. The Shifters had arrived. Through the rift, a fleet of sleek, dark vessels emerged, an armada of the Chrono Shifters, their ships shimmering in and out of existence like phantoms. They moved as one, their tactics precise and deadly. A single vessel, larger than the rest, broke off from the group, its silhouette growing clearer as it passed through the rift's edge. It was an advanced battleship, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. At its helm stood a figure, one Alara knew all too well. The leader of the Shifters, Jonas Thorne. Alara's blood ran cold. He had once been her mentor. He had trained her for this war. And now he was the very reason they were fighting. She had hoped to never face him again, but now the time had come. "Thorne," Ilara whispered under her breath. You're the one who started this war. And now I'll finish it. The battle began in an instant. The Odyssey's weapons fired in rapid succession, sending volleys of energy blasts at the advancing shifter fleet. But the enemy ships moved in and out of time, avoiding the blasts with unnerving precision. It was like trying to hit a shadow, impossible to lock onto. Then the larger ship, Thorn's flagship, powered forward, and a wave of temporal energy washed over the Odyssey, distorting the space around them. Ilara felt herself briefly pulled into another timeline, one where everything was wrong. The stars were different, the colors of the universe shifting unnaturally. She could see fragments of her life, alternate versions of herself in alternate realities, all of them flickering out of existence. A powerful shockwave hit, and Ilara was snapped back to the present. The ship was holding, but for how long? The time had come. The Chrono Shifters would not stop until every timeline was theirs to control. But Ilara wasn't going down without a fight. I won't let you destroy everything we've built, she said through gritted teeth, looking at Thorn's flagship on the screen. This ends now. The war across time and dimensions was far from over, but Ilara was ready to face whatever came next. Time itself might be fractured, but humanity would not fall. Not if she had anything to say about it. The rift continued to pulse, a dark energy sweeping through the fabric of time, distorting everything in its path. The Odyssey shuddered under the onslaught, its systems under strain as it fought against the growing pressure from the Chrono Shifter fleet. Ilara stood firm, her resolve hardening with each passing moment. The reality of the situation had set in. This was a battle not just for the future but for the very essence of existence itself. Thorn's flagship loomed large on the view screen, its dark silhouette casting a long shadow across the battlefield. The Chrono Shifters had always been elusive, a shadow war fought across the ages. But now, as the leader of the Shifters pushed forward, it was clear that this conflict had escalated to something far greater than anyone had anticipated. Ilara's mind raced. The Chrono Beacon had sent out its distress signal, but there was no sign of reinforcements yet. The Coalition's ships were still en route, but the Chrono Shifters were pushing them back with relentless force. If they didn't act soon, it would be too late. Captain, the rift's growing stronger. It's pulling the Odyssey toward Thorn's flagship, Cole reported, his voice strained from the effort of keeping the ship steady. We need to break free, Ilara replied, her eyes fixed on the twisting rift. She knew they couldn't win a war of attrition against the Shifters' fleet, not unless they found a way to turn the tide. Aurora, run an analysis of the rift's power source. There must be a way to disrupt it. Aurora's calm voice responded almost immediately. Captain, the rift's power appears to be linked directly to the Chrono Shifters' flagship. If we can target their main energy core, we may be able to destabilize the rift long enough to escape. However, this will require a precise strike to a weak point in the ship's temporal shield. Ilara nodded. Prepare a targeting solution. We're going in. There was no room for hesitation. The Odyssey had to make a desperate strike, even if it meant risking the ship and crew. The Chrono Shifters had already rewritten too much of history, and if Thorn succeeded in his plans, they would be erased from existence altogether. Ilara turned to Cole. Prepare the fighters for launch. We'll need cover if we're going to get close enough to their ship. Aye, Captain, Cole said, giving a sharp salute before hurrying off to the hangar bay. As the crew scrambled into action, Ilara took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. The Odyssey was humanity's last hope, but the cost of failure now would be catastrophic. With the rift destabilizing the timelines, any small mistake could result in an unraveling chain of events that no one could predict. We're ready, Captain, Darius's voice came through her earpiece. The Chrono Core is at full power. We can make the jump whenever you give the order. Not yet, Ilara replied, eyes narrowing as she studied the rift. We need to make sure we hit their flagship first. The Odyssey can't make the jump until the rift's destabilized. With a final glance at the tactical readout, Ilara adjusted her stance and faced the crew in the command center. Everyone, we're going into the heart of this war. Stay focused. We're not just fighting for one timeline. We're fighting for all of them. The future of humanity depends on what we do next. Her words echoed in the room as the crew moved into position, their eyes filled with a steely determination. They had come this far and they would see this fight through to the end. Outside, the Odyssey's fleet of fighters launched in a flurry of motion, their sleek forms darting through space, engaging the Chrono Shifters' smaller ships in a deadly dance. The air around Ilara's ship crackled with the intensity of the battle, the flickering light of energy blasts and temporal distortions sending ripples through the blackness of space. The Odyssey herself advanced toward the rift, the ship's engines roaring as it powered forward, determined to reach the shifter flagship. Ilara's fingers danced over the controls as she monitored the progress of their attack. The Chrono Shifters' ships flickered in and out of reality, their movements almost imperceptible as they moved to intercept the Odyssey's advance. But the Odyssey was faster, its systems enhanced by human ingenuity, its AI predicting the shifters' every move. The smaller ships exploded in bursts of light as they were hit by precision shots from the Odyssey's weapons. In the distance, Thorn's flagship grew larger. Ilara's heart pounded as they closed the distance. The ship's weapons fired on them, temporal blasts that rippled through time and space, distorting the very fabric of the universe. "Hold steady," Ilara barked as the ship rocked with each blast. She could see it, the weak point on Thorn's ship, a shimmering node near its core flickering in and out of existence. "Targeting the weak point now," Aurora reported. "Engaging weapons." The ship's weapons systems hummed as the targeting solution locked onto the node. Time seemed to slow as Ilara watched, her pulse quickening. The shifter's ships were closing in, but the strike was imminent. The fate of all timelines rested on this one shot. "Now," Ilara shouted. The Odyssey fired. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. Then a blinding explosion erupted from the heart of the shifter flagship, a shockwave rippling through space as the node shattered. The rift trembled violently, its structure beginning to collapse as the energy holding it together faltered. The shifter fleet seemed to hesitate as if caught in the aftermath of the attack. But Ilara didn't wait. She slammed the controls forward, commanding the Odyssey to break free from the rift's pull. "Take us out, Darius," she ordered. With a roar, the ship surged forward, breaking free from the collapsing rift just as it began to implode. The Odyssey shot forward, tearing through the fabric of time, leaving the chaos of the shifter fleet behind. The ship was battered, its systems strained, but they had made it. Ilara glanced at the view screen, her heart racing. The rift was collapsing, and with it, the Chrono Shifters' grip on reality was weakening. But as they moved further away from the devastation, Ilara knew the fight was far from over. The shifters had been defeated for now, but they would return. Time, after all, was their battlefield. And Ilara would be ready. "We've bought the timeline some breathing room," she said, her voice steady. "But the war isn't over. Not by a long shot." She looked out into the black void, knowing that no matter where the battle took them, she and her crew would continue to fight, for the future, for humanity, and for every reality that depended on their survival. The fight across time and dimensions was far from over. But humanity had proven that it was far from helpless. And in the end, that would be the shifters' undoing. The Odyssey drifted through the blackness of space, its hull battered but still intact. The temporal rift had collapsed behind them, its unstable energies finally fading into nothingness. For the moment there was silence. The chaos had subsided, but Ilara knew this peace was only temporary. The Chrono Shifters hadn't been defeated, they'd simply been pushed back. And though the rift had closed, the damage they'd caused to the very fabric of time was far from undone. Ilara stood in the command center, staring at the vast emptiness ahead. The stars blinked back at her, distant and cold, as if the universe itself had taken a breath after the storm. "Aurora, status report," she said, her voice calm but weary. "All systems are online, Captain," Aurora responded, its voice as steady as ever. "The ship has sustained moderate damage, but nothing that threatens our immediate functionality. However, I must advise caution. The temporal disruption caused by the rift has left residual fluctuations across multiple timelines. This could cause unpredictable events moving forward." Ilara nodded, her mind already racing with the implications. The shifter's ability to manipulate time wasn't just dangerous, it was an existential threat. They could warp reality, change history, and erase humanity's future with a single move. If the Odyssey didn't find a way to stop them once and for all, the timeline could fracture beyond repair. "What are our options, Aurora?" Ilara asked. "The most immediate course of action would be to seek refuge within the Temporal Coalition's core sector. It is relatively untouched by the shifters' influence, and their forces have not yet made a significant push into that region. However, the time discrepancies may complicate the journey. We could experience temporal distortions along the way. We'll deal with it," Ilara said, her voice firm. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Plot the course. We need to get to the Coalition's core and figure out how to fight back." As Aurora began recalibrating their route, Ilara glanced at the view screen again. The stars were still, but the sense of dread lingered. The shifters' war wasn't just about the battle at hand, it was a war for existence itself. And though they had managed to hold them off, the price of victory had already begun to show. Hours passed, and the Odyssey continued its course through the black void. The crew had retreated to their quarters, taking what little respite they could manage before the next battle. Elara sat in the command center, alone with her thoughts. The message from her alternate self echoed in her mind. You must make a choice. The fate of the multiverse depends on it. What choice? What decision had she been talking about? Elara could only assume that whatever it was, it involved the fate of all timelines, all of humanity's futures. But what if the very nature of those futures was forever changed by the Shifters' actions? Could she even make a decision that would preserve them all? She was interrupted by a soft ping on her wrist pad. It was a message from Darius, his voice coming through clear and steady. Captain, I've been analyzing the data from the rift collapse, he said. And there's something you need to see. It's not just the Shifters who are affected by the timeline shifts. The Odyssey, the entire crew. We've been pulled into multiple timelines, and I believe we're not the only ones. The rift, it's left echoes of all possible futures. And something tells me, Elara, that the Shifters aren't just trying to erase us. They're trying to rewrite us. Elara's blood ran cold. Rewrite us? Yeah. It's subtle, small distortions, anomalies we can't quite explain. But I'm certain of it. Something about the Shifters' technology is causing us to flicker between realities. The crew is starting to experience changes. It's as if we're becoming pieces of a larger puzzle that doesn't make sense. Elara clenched her fists. She'd feared something like this. The Shifters had the power to erase time, but they could also weave it back together like threads in a tapestry. Only the tapestry would be theirs, not humanity's. Keep monitoring everything, Darius, Elara said, her voice hard. Don't let any of the crew undergo any shifts. We need to know who we are. We need to know what's real. The Odyssey pressed on, fighting against the flow of time itself. But as they neared the Temporal Coalition's core sector, the crew couldn't ignore the strange occurrences any longer. Elara herself began to feel the effects. Flickers of memories that didn't belong to her, glimpses of futures she hadn't lived. For moments she was trapped in a loop, seeing fragments of another version of herself, one where everything had gone wrong. She could see herself lost, hopeless, unable to stop the Shifters. A part of her wanted to sink into those memories, to accept them as truth. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. She was the captain of the Odyssey, and she would not let her crew be consumed by these false futures. We can't let the Shifters rewrite us, Elara whispered to herself, the determination in her voice a quiet roar. As they finally entered the Temporal Coalition's core sector, the shift in their surroundings was palpable. The once vibrant stars in the Coalition's domain seemed faded, as if they were being drained of their color. The temporal disruptions were at their peak, and the core, normally a place of stability, was now a twisted reflection of its former self. The Coalition had been prepared for the war across time. They had built their defenses, designed their strategies. But even they hadn't anticipated the true scale of the Shifters' threat. The core sector was in disarray, fleets scattered, their commands fragmented by the same time distortions that were now tearing apart the Odyssey. A massive figure appeared on the view screen, an imposing figure standing before a shattered temple of time. It was Jonas Thorne. His face was cold, unrecognizable in its blankness. He wasn't just a man anymore. He had become something else entirely, an embodiment of the Shifters' mission, the ultimate instrument of time's unraveling. This is it, Elara said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. We face him now. Not just for our timeline, but for all of them. With the flicker of a moment, Jonas Thorne spoke, his voice echoing through every corner of reality. Elara Vale. You can't stop this. The timelines will collapse and you will be rewritten. You will become nothing. Elara's response was fierce. Not while I'm still breathing. And in that moment, as time itself seemed to freeze, she knew the choice she had to make. It wasn't just about saving one timeline or even the future of humanity. It was about refusing to be erased. The battle ahead would decide not just their fate, but the fate of every possible future. The war for existence itself was reaching its climax. And Elara Vale would make sure humanity's story was one worth telling. Time, after all, could bend, but it could never break them.